What happens when a man on top of the world trades his queen for a pawn? Richard Sterling had it all. A loving wife who helped build his empire, a multi-million-dollar company, and a name that commanded respect. He threw it all away for a younger woman, casting aside the architect of his success like a forgotten blueprint. He thought he'd won. But he never imagined that the woman he left with nothing would come back with everything, becoming a billionaire who would drag him into the biggest fight of his life, a fight for his house, his company, and the very name he built. This isn't a story about a divorce. It's a story of an epic downfall and an even more spectacular rise. The Sterling name was synonymous with a certain kind of Californian dream. It wasn't the brash new money flash of Silicon Valley, nor the inherited prestige of old San Francisco dynasties. Sterling Innovations was something more tangible, more foundational. They designed and manufactured the high-end bespoke components that made modern luxury possible. The silent automated systems in smart homes, the advanced filtration technology in infinity pools, the specialized composites for private jets. And at the head of it all was Richard Sterling, a man who looked every bit the part. With his silver-streaked hair, custom-tailored suits, and a smile that could disarm a hostile board meeting, he was the face of the company. His wife Eleanor was the company's ghost. They had met at Stanford. He was the charismatic business student who could sell sand in the desert. She was the quiet, prodigiously brilliant chemical engineering postgrad. They fell in love in the hushed aisles of the library, their story woven between textbooks and late-night study sessions. It was Eleanor's early research into polymer membranes that became the seed of their first product. They started in their garage in Palo Alto, with Eleanor perfecting the formulas and Richard charming their way into their first few contracts. For 25 years, that was their dynamic. Eleanor was the chief technology officer in title, but in practice she was the silent engine. She ran the labs, oversaw R&D, and solved the impossible problems, while Richard became the public-facing titan. He was the one featured in Forbes, the one who gave keynote speeches, the one who golfed with senators. Eleanor, content with her work and her family, never coveted the spotlight. She preferred the clean, predictable certainty of a laboratory to the messy, unpredictable world of public relations. Their life was a masterpiece of curated perfection. The sprawling estate in Atherton, a testament to modern architecture with glass walls overlooking ancient oaks, was a home Eleanor had helped design. Their 2 children, Leo and Chloe, were now in college, their futures seemingly paved with gold. To the outside world, the Sterlings were unbreakable. But inside, the glass house cracks were beginning to show. Richard, now in his early 50s, had grown accustomed to the applause. He started to believe his own press. The we of their early days had slowly, insidiously become I. It was my company, my vision, my success. Eleanor's contributions were mentally demoted from foundational partner to supportive wife. He'd pat her hand at dinner parties and say, "I couldn't do it without my Ellie," the words a hollow echo of a truth he no longer fully believed. The catalyst for the collapse had a name: Isabella Rossi. Isabella was 26, an MBA grad with a razor-sharp mind and ambition that burned like a wildfire. Hired into the marketing department, she was a supernova. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her strategic worship of Richard that was her true weapon. She didn't just admire him, she deconstructed his ego and fed every piece of it. She quoted his old speeches back to him, hung on his every word in meetings, and made him feel not like a successful 52-year-old, but like the 30-year-old visionary he still saw in the mirror. Eleanor saw it first, of course. A shift in Richard's schedule. The hushed phone calls. The sudden intense interest in the company's marketing strategy, a department he'd long considered secondary to his own deal-making. She tried to talk to him, but her concerns were dismissed as paranoia, as the anxieties of a woman of a certain age. "Ellie, for God's sake," he'd said, waving a dismissive hand. "She's a brilliant employee. I'm mentoring her. Is a man not allowed to foster young talent anymore?" The mentorship culminated on their 25th wedding anniversary. Richard had planned a lavish party at the estate. Hundreds of guests mingled on the perfectly manicured lawns. Richard gave a speech raising a glass to Eleanor. To my rock, my anchor, 25 years. Who would have thought? Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the caterers had cleared away the champagne flutes, he told her. He stood by the vast glass wall overlooking the illuminated pool, his reflection a dark silhouette against the glittering water. I can't do this anymore, Eleanor. The words hung in the sterile air of their perfect home. Eleanor, still in her silver anniversary gown, felt a cold dread creep over her. Do what, Richard? What are you talking about? This, he said, gesturing vaguely at the house, the life at her. Us. I'm in love with Isabella. I'm leaving. There was no negotiation, no pleading. It was a declaration. It was a business decision. The asset of their marriage had ceased to perform and was being liquidated. Eleanor felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The man she had built a world with was looking at her as if she were a stranger, an obstacle. The divorce was a masterclass in calculated cruelty. Richard's lawyer, a pinstriped shark named Marcus Thorne, painted a picture of an amicable, generous separation. But the terms were brutal. Richard, claiming his personal brand and the sterling name were the company's primary assets, argued that giving Eleanor a significant share of Sterling Innovations would destabilize the company and harm its shareholders. He offered her a settlement. It was on paper a lot of money, enough for her to live comfortably for the rest of her life. But it was a pittance compared to the company's billion-dollar valuation. The offer came with conditions. She would get the lump sum and their smaller vacation home in Aspen. He would keep the Atherton estate, the company, and everything associated with it. And then came the final, most humiliating blow, a non-disclosure agreement of draconian scope. She was forbidden from speaking about the divorce, about Richard's affair, and most critically from claiming any role in the founding or technological development of Sterling Innovations. She was to be erased from the corporate history, officially relegated to the role of the first wife. Her own lawyer, a kind but outgunned family law attorney, advised her she could fight it. Eleanor, we can drag this out. We can prove your contributions. But Eleanor was broken. The fight had gone out of her. The public humiliation, the thought of having her life and her husband's betrayal dissected in the press was more than she could bear. Her children were caught in the crossfire. Leo, her eldest, was captivated by his father's charisma and seemed to swallow the narrative that this was just a sad but necessary evolution. Chloe, however, saw the raw pain in her mother's eyes and was furious, refusing to even speak to her father. The family was fracturing, and a long, ugly court battle felt like a final killing blow. So she signed. She signed away her past, her contribution, her name. 2 weeks later, movers were at the Atherton estate. Eleanor walked through the cavernous rooms one last time. The house, once a symbol of their shared dream, now felt like a mausoleum. Her lab at Sterling Innovations, a place that had been her sanctuary, was already being repurposed. Richard, in a gesture he probably thought was kind, told her she could take any of her personal effects from the office. She took only one thing, a box of old leather-bound notebooks from the garage days filled with her frantic scrawled equations and preliminary research. He didn't even notice. To him they were just dusty old relics of a past he was eager to shed. She moved into a modest condo in San Jose, the anonymity of the sprawling city a comfort. The news broke soon after. Titan of industry. Richard Sterling. Divorces. Wife of 25 years. Steps out with new love. Isabella Rossi. The articles painted Richard as a man rejuvenated, a visionary embarking on a bold new chapter. Eleanor Vance. They used her maiden name as she was no longer a Sterling, was a footnote. The world celebrated Richard's new beginning, and in the quiet solitude of her new, smaller life, Eleanor Vance was left to grieve the end of hers. She had lost her husband, her home, her life's work, and her name. She had nothing left, or so everyone, including Richard, believed. The first 6 months were a blur of gray. Eleanor existed in a state of suspended animation. The silence of her condo, a deafening roar compared to the constant hum of the life she once knew. Grief was a physical presence, a heavy cloak she couldn't shrug off. She avoided the news, but the world had a way of seeping in. A glimpse of Richard and Isabella at a charity gala on a friend's social media feed, looking radiant and powerful. An industry newsletter announcing Sterling Innovations' aggressive new marketing push, spearheaded by the brilliant Isabella, now a senior vice president. Each mention was a fresh stab of betrayal. Her daughter Chloe was her lifeline. She would visit every weekend bringing groceries and a fierce protective anger that kept Eleanor from sinking completely. "He's an idiot, Mom," Chloe would say, her eyes flashing. "He threw away the smartest person he ever knew. You built that place. You did." Leo was more distant. He called his conversations stilted and awkward. He was working a summer internship at his father's company and was caught in Richard's powerful orbit. "Dad says the company's poised for its biggest growth yet." He'd report, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Isabella has some amazing ideas for global branding." Eleanor would just listen, her heart aching for the son she felt she was losing. The turning point didn't come with a flash of lightning, but with the mundane reality of a leaking faucet. A persistent drip, drip, drip in her kitchen sink became the soundtrack to her sorrow. After a week of listening to it, something in her snapped. She wasn't a helpless woman. She was a world-class engineer. She pulled out a toolbox, watched a few online tutorials to familiarize herself with the specific fixture, and methodically, expertly dismantled and repaired the faucet. As she wiped her hands, a sense of satisfaction, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months, washed over her. It was a small victory, but it was hers. It was a problem she had identified and solved with her own two hands and her own mind. That small act of self-reliance sparked a flicker of the woman she used to be. A few days later, restless and tired of staring at the same four walls, she unsealed the box she had taken from her old office. The box of old notebooks. She opened the first one. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed. Inside, in her familiar script, was the raw, unfiltered genesis of Sterling Innovations. Page after page of molecular diagrams, polymer chain configurations, and theoretical calculations. She saw the dead ends, the frustrating failures, and then the breakthroughs. It was all there, the intellectual DNA of a billion-dollar company. Richard had dismissed them as relics, but to Eleanor they were a testament. "I did this," she thought, a surge of ownership cutting through the grief. She kept flipping. Tucked into the back of the third notebook was a section she'd almost forgotten about. It was a side project, a theoretical tangent she had explored in the early 2000s. While the core technology of Sterling Innovations focused on water purification for luxury and industrial applications, this was different. It was a concept for a highly efficient, low-energy desalination and purification membrane using a novel graphene oxide composite. At the time, the materials were too expensive, the application too niche. Richard had called it her pet project, a distraction from their commercial goals. "Nobody's going to pay for that, Ellie," he had said. "Focus on the pool filters." She had shelved it, but now, reading her own notes 2 decades later, she saw it with fresh eyes. The world had changed. Water scarcity was no longer a distant threat. It was a global crisis. The cost of producing graphene had plummeted. The technology was no longer a niche hobby. It was a potential revolution. A fire long dormant was rekindled. This wasn't Richard's. This wasn't Sterling Innovations. This idea, this elegant, beautiful solution, was entirely unequivocally hers. The path forward was terrifying. She had the settlement money, but it wasn't enough for the kind of R&D this project would require. She needed investors, and she was a 53-year-old woman with a 25-year gap on her public resume, bound by an NDA that prevented her from even mentioning her true experience. Her first attempts were humbling failures. She set up meetings with venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. She walked into glass-walled boardrooms, a ghost from another era. They saw a middle-aged woman with a theoretical idea and no track record they could verify. "So, Ms. Vance," one young VC in a designer hoodie asked, barely looking up from his phone, "what have you been doing for the last 2 decades?" "I was in a private R&D role," she would say, the words tasting like ash. The NDA choked her. She couldn't say, "I built Sterling Innovations." They dismissed her politely, their eyes glazing over as she tried to explain the science. The message was clear. They weren't investing in an idea, they were investing in a founder, and she didn't look like the founders they were used to. Just as she was about to give up, Chloe gave her an idea. "Mom, you're going to the wrong people. These tech bros want a 20-year-old in a hoodie who talks about disruption. You need someone who understands deep tech, someone who values substance over sizzle." Chloe did some research and found a name: Julian Croft. Croft was a legend, a semi-retired venture capitalist known for his shrewd, often contrarian bets on hard science and engineering ventures. He was old school, notoriously difficult, and had no patience for buzzwords. Eleanor secured a meeting through a persistent old university contact. Julian Croft's office was not a playground of beanbags and kombucha taps. It was lined with dark wood and books, a massive mahogany desk standing in the center. Croft himself was a hawk-faced man in his late 60s with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her. She began her pitch, her voice trembling slightly. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. She laid out the science, the potential, the global need. She didn't dumb it down. She gave him the full force of her intellect. When she finished, he was silent for a full minute. "The science is sound," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Potentially revolutionary. But you're a ghost. There's nothing on you for 25 years. You're Eleanor Vance, Richard Sterling's ex-wife. He paid you off and you disappeared. Now you reappear with this. How do I know you didn't steal this from his R&D department on your way out?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and cruel. But this time Eleanor didn't break. The months of grief and humiliation had forged something new in her steel. "You know," she said, her voice steady and clear, "because Richard Sterling is a salesman. A brilliant one, I'll grant you. But he's not an innovator. He sells the things other people create. I know this because the other people was me. I am bound by an agreement that prevents me from telling you the specifics, but I can tell you this. Give me a lab, give me 6 months, and give me a small team. I will build you a prototype that proves every single claim I have made today. If I fail, you've lost a little. If I succeed, we will change the world, and you will make more money than you ever dreamed of." She held his gaze unblinking. For the first time, a flicker of something respect showed in Julian Croft's eyes. He saw past the ex-wife, past the ghost. He saw the engineer. He saw the fire. "All right, Ms. Vance," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's change the world." He agreed to provide seed funding. It came with ruthless terms, tight budgets, aggressive milestones, and a significant equity stake for his firm. But it was a chance. Eleanor moved out of her condo and into a small rental house closer to the industrial park in Fremont, where they leased a modest lab space. She named her new company Vance Hydro Solutions. It was more than a company. It was a reclamation. She was taking back her name. She hired a small team of bright, hungry young engineers fresh out of Stanford and Berkeley who were drawn to her quiet brilliance and the sheer elegance of her science. They worked grueling hours fueled by cheap pizza and the thrill of being on the cusp of something extraordinary. For Eleanor, the lab was a sanctuary reborn. The familiar scent of ozone and solvents, the hum of machinery, the thrill of a successful test run, it was all coming back to her. While Richard and Isabella were being photographed on yachts in the Mediterranean, Eleanor Vance was in a lab coat covered in grease, painstakingly calibrating a differential pressure gauge. While Sterling Innovations was pouring millions into a Super Bowl commercial, Vance Hydro was celebrating a breakthrough in membrane stability that nobody outside their small lab would understand. The world had forgotten Eleanor Vance, and that was just fine, because she wasn't looking for applause. She was building the future, and a storm was gathering, a storm that would eventually, inevitably, put her on a direct collision course with the man who had cast her aside. The next 3 years were a study in contrasts, a real-time fable of substance versus style. The trajectories of Vance Hydro Solutions and Sterling Innovations moved in starkly opposite directions. At Sterling Innovations, the Isabella Rossi era was in full swing. Flush with cash and Richard's adoration, she operated with near total autonomy. Her philosophy was simple. Perception is reality. The company's focus shifted dramatically from R&D to marketing. The engineering department, once the heart of the company and Eleanor's domain, saw its budget slashed. Veteran engineers who had been with the company for decades and were loyal to Eleanor's rigorous methodology grew disgruntled. They were now being asked to cut corners to use slightly cheaper materials to improve margins, to rush testing protocols to meet aggressive launch dates set by marketing. Richard, utterly besotted, saw Isabella's changes as bold and visionary. He loved the new buzz she was creating. They sponsored film festivals, launched a glossy lifestyle magazine, and put their name on a professional tennis tournament. Isabella convinced Richard to acquire a trendy but unprofitable smart jewelry company for an exorbitant sum, claiming it would position the Sterling brand with a younger, hipper demographic. "We're not just a components company anymore, darling," she'd whisper to him over dinner at Michelin-starred restaurants. "We're a luxury lifestyle brand. We're selling an aspiration." Richard, whose own success had been built on the tangible quality of Eleanor's engineering, was now selling a feeling. And for a while it worked. The stock price remained high, buoyed by the constant stream of positive press releases and splashy announcements. But within the walls of the company, the foundation was rotting. A new line of eco-friendly pool filters rushed to market, began to fail at an alarming rate. The Sterling name, once a guarantee of quality, started to become associated with costly repairs and poor customer service. Leo, working his way up the corporate ladder, saw the problems firsthand. He'd bring customer complaints to his father only to be brushed aside. "These are just growing pains, son," Richard would say, waving his hand dismissively. "When you're innovating as fast as we are, there are bound to be a few hiccups. Isabella has the data. Our brand recognition is at an all-time high." Leo saw the data, but he also saw the panicked emails from the engineering team and the growing number of warranty claims. He started to feel a creeping sense of dread. The logic of the company no longer made sense. It was a beautiful, gleaming edifice built on a crumbling foundation. He'd call his sister Chloe, his voice laced with a confusion he couldn't voice to his father. "I don't get it," he'd confess. "It's all about the party, the announcement, not the product." Chloe's response was always blunt. "It's because the engineer left the building, Leo. Dad is a front man and Isabella is a publicist. You can't build things with press releases." Meanwhile, in a nondescript building in Fremont, Eleanor and her small team were quietly achieving the impossible. Vance Hydro Solutions was a place of monastic focus. There were no frills, no marketing department, no lifestyle magazine. Every dollar Julian Croft had invested went directly into research and development. Eleanor proved to be more than just a brilliant scientist. She was an inspiring leader. She fostered a culture of intense collaboration and intellectual rigor. She knew the names of her employees' children. She was the first to arrive and the last to leave, and she was never afraid to admit when she was wrong. Her team revered her. After 18 months of relentless work, they had a working prototype. It was a small, elegant cylinder that could take a liter of contaminated salty seawater and, with the energy equivalent of a standard light bulb, turn it into a liter of pure drinkable water in under 3 minutes. Julian Croft came to the lab for the demonstration. He watched silent and hawk-eyed as Eleanor's lead engineer poured murky water from the San Francisco Bay into the device. Minutes later, a tap was turned and crystal-clear water flowed into a beaker. Eleanor handed it to him. He swirled it, sniffed it, and took a sip. His expression didn't change, but his eyes held a glint of triumph. "How quickly can you scale this?" he asked. That was the starting gun. With Croft's next round of funding significantly larger this time, they moved into a proper manufacturing facility. Their first contracts weren't glamorous. They worked with NGOs to deploy small-scale units in drought-stricken villages in East Africa. They partnered with disaster relief agencies to provide emergency water purification after a hurricane in the Caribbean. The results were spectacular. The Vance Hydro units were robust, easy to operate, and incredibly effective. Word began to spread not through press releases, but through field reports and humanitarian bulletins. They weren't a lifestyle brand. They were a lifeline. The financial world started to take notice. An influential tech journal published a deep-dive article titled, "The Vance Paradigm, the Low-Energy Water Solution We've Been Waiting For." It profiled the company's technology and its mysterious low-profile founder, Eleanor Vance. The article noted her complete lack of public history, speculating she came from a skunkworks project at a major defense contractor. The irony was not lost on Eleanor. The first major blow to Sterling Innovations came from an unexpected quarter. The smart jewelry company they had acquired was a spectacular flop. After burning through millions in marketing, it was revealed that their core product had a fatal security flaw, making users' data vulnerable. The resulting scandal was a PR nightmare. The stock, which had been artificially inflated by hype, began to slide. Richard, for the first time, felt a flicker of doubt. He was stretched thin, having leveraged a significant portion of the company's assets to fund Isabella's acquisitions and marketing campaigns. He tried to rein her in, but she was a force of nature he had unleashed and could no longer control. "You have to trust me, Richard," she'd argue, her voice sharp. "Brands have to be brave. We'll recover. We just need a bigger, bolder campaign." Then came the call that would change everything. A major municipality in Southern California, the San Bernardino Valley, was facing an unprecedented water crisis. A combination of prolonged drought and industrial contamination had left their reservoirs critically low and tainted with carcinogens. They needed a large-scale immediate purification solution. Sterling Innovations, with its long-standing reputation in water systems, was the obvious first bidder. Richard and his team put together a massive proposal based on their traditional energy-intensive reverse osmosis technology. It was expensive, slow to implement, and would place a huge strain on the state's already taxed power grid. As the city council deliberated, a junior council member who had read the article on Vance Hydro Solutions made a suggestion. "Why don't we reach out to this Vance company? Their technology sounds perfect for this." Eleanor received the inquiry. It was the moment she had been working towards. This wasn't about saving a village. This was about saving a city. It was the ultimate proof of concept. She and her team worked for a week straight, drawing up a proposal that was audacious in its efficiency. The two proposals were presented on the same day. Richard Sterling, polished and confident, presented his plan filled with glossy projections and familiar assurances. Then Eleanor Vance, calm and understated, presented hers. She didn't have a flashy presentation. She had data, hard verifiable data on energy consumption, water output, and purity levels that were simply an order of magnitude better than Sterling's. She demonstrated a scaled-up version of her device, turning a drum of locally sourced contaminated water into pure drinking water right there in the council chambers. The council was stunned. The choice was obvious. A week later, the announcement was made. The city of San Bernardino had awarded the largest water purification contract in a decade, valued at over $500 million, to a relatively unknown company, Vance Hydro Solutions. The news hit the financial world like a thunderclap. Sterling Innovations stock plummeted by 30% in a single day. Richard was humiliated, his company's technology publicly exposed as outdated and inefficient. That evening he sat in the cavernous living room of the Atherton estate, the house he had fought to keep, and watched the business news. The anchor was reporting on the groundbreaking deal. And then a picture of Eleanor filled the screen. She was standing in her lab, looking focused and confident. The chyron beneath her read, "Eleanor Vance, the new Queen of Water." Richard stared at the screen, a feeling of cold, sickening dread washing over him. The ghost he had created, the woman he had erased, was not only back, but she was on her way to becoming more powerful than he had ever been. He had taken her name, but she was in the process of building an empire with her own. And he had a terrible feeling that this was only the beginning. The San Bernardino contract transformed Vance Hydro Solutions from a promising startup into a global powerhouse. The successful deployment was a masterclass in execution. Within a year, Eleanor's technology was providing clean water to over 2 million people, and her company's valuation soared. Julian Croft's initial investment had yielded a return of over 10,000%. On paper, Eleanor Vance, the woman who had walked away with a modest settlement, was now a billionaire. Her story became the stuff of legend in the business world. Forbes, the very magazine that had once celebrated Richard, put her on its cover. The headline was simple but devastating. The vindicated how Eleanor Vance built a better world from the ashes of a betrayal. The article, meticulously researched, hinted at the real story, piecing together her past through interviews with former colleagues and university professors. While her NDA prevented her from speaking about it directly, the narrative was clear. The genius behind Sterling Innovations had been its quietest founder. For Richard, the world was unraveling with terrifying speed. The public humiliation of losing the San Bernardino contract was just the beginning. The failure triggered a crisis of confidence among his investors. His board, once placid and deferential, was now openly questioning his leadership and, more pointedly, the unchecked influence of Isabella Rossi. Their relationship, once a whirlwind of passion and mutual adoration, began to curdle under the pressure. Their arguments became more frequent, more venomous. Isabella blamed Richard's old-fashioned reputation for the loss, while Richard blamed her reckless spending for weakening the company's financial position. The love that had bloomed in the sunshine of success began to wither in the harsh winter of failure. The final nail in Sterling Innovations' coffin was a catastrophe of its own making. A luxury condominium tower in Dubai, which had its entire water and air filtration system designed by Sterling, suffered a catastrophic failure. A batch of faulty polymer seals, a direct result of cost-cutting measures pushed by the new management, degraded rapidly in the desert heat, leading to massive leaks and a system-wide contamination. The damage was in the hundreds of millions. The lawsuit that followed was even bigger. The news broke and the company's stock collapsed. It was no longer a slide. It was a free fall. The board called an emergency meeting. Richard walked into the room to find not his allies, but a firing squad. Marcus Thorne, his own lawyer, who also sat on the board, looked at him with cold, dispassionate eyes. Richard was ousted as CEO of the company that bore his name. He was allowed to keep his seat on the board, a meaningless gesture to save face, but his power was gone. The board installed a grim-faced turnaround specialist to try and salvage the wreckage. That same week, Isabella quietly packed her bags. There was no dramatic confrontation. She simply left a note on the cold marble countertop of the Atherton kitchen. It was short and unsentimental. She was moving on, taking with her the severance package they had agreed upon in their pre-nuptial agreement, a package that siphoned off a significant chunk of Richard's remaining liquid assets. He realized with a sickening lurch that she had never been in love with him. She had been in love with his trajectory. Now that it was pointing down, she was cashing out. Richard was left alone in the vast, empty glass house, surrounded by the hollow echoes of his triumphs. He was a pariah in the industry he once dominated. He was facing financial ruin from the Dubai lawsuit. His son Leo had resigned from Sterling Innovations weeks earlier, unable to stomach the direction of the company any longer. He now worked for a small environmental nonprofit a world away from the corporate prestige his father had prized. Chloe, of course, had never returned his calls. He was a king in a borrowed castle watching his kingdom burn. It was during this dark period that Eleanor's lawyer, Anya Sharma, a sharp, tenacious attorney who had become a close friend and confidant, made a discovery. Anya had never been satisfied with the original divorce settlement and had on her own initiative spent years digging into the corporate archives of Sterling Innovations, using legal channels to access documents from the company's formation. She called Eleanor to her office. "I think I found something," Anya said, her voice tight with excitement. She spread a series of documents across her desk. They were the original incorporation papers from 25 years ago, along with technical appendices. Richard and his lawyers did a masterful job of building the narrative that he was the visionary and you were the tech support, Anya explained. But they got sloppy back at the very beginning. "Look at this." She pointed to a clause in the appendix of the initial patent filing for the company's core filtration technology, the very technology that was still the foundation of most of its products. The appendix cross-referenced an external document, a technical paper detailing the underlying chemical process. The author of that paper, Eleanor Vance, Stanford Department of Chemical Engineering. Her old postgraduate thesis. Your NDA prevents you from claiming you were the founder, Anya said, her eyes gleaming. But it doesn't change the documented fact that the company's cornerstone intellectual property is demonstrably your academic work. Work you did before the company or your marriage even existed. You were never compensated for the licensing of that foundational IP. He didn't just build a company with you, he built it on your independent intellectual property. Eleanor stared at the documents, her mind racing. It wasn't just about credit. It was a legal claim, a massive one. What does this mean? Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anya Sharma leaned forward, a grim smile on her face. It means we're going to court, but this time we're not fighting over a divorce settlement. We're fighting for the ownership of Sterling Innovations itself. The news of the lawsuit landed like a bombshell. Vance sues Sterling for foundational IP rights. It was the ultimate David and Goliath story. Except David was now a billionaire with an army of the best lawyers money could buy. Richard, already reeling, was blindsided. He had always seen Eleanor's work as part of their shared marital efforts, something that automatically became his upon the company's formation. He never imagined her premarital academic work could be used as a weapon against him. His arrogance had created a fatal blind spot. He was forced to sell off assets to fund his legal defense. He mortgaged the Atherton house to the hilt. The pinstriped shark Marcus Thorne, who had once been his attack dog, now represented the company, and their interests were no longer aligned with Richard's. He had to hire a new, less formidable legal team. The stage was set for a final brutal confrontation. It wouldn't be a battle between a husband and wife, but between two titans. One was desperate, fighting for the scraps of a legacy. The other was ascendant, fighting for the truth of her own history. The collision course, set in motion the day Richard walked out, was about to reach its explosive conclusion in a California courtroom. The trial of Vance versus Sterling et al. Commenced not merely as a legal proceeding, but as a public spectacle. The Santa Clara County Superior Courthouse in San Jose became the epicenter of the business world's attention. Media vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metallic sunflowers, hungry for the light of this explosive story. Every morning the main players would walk the gauntlet of clicking cameras, their silent passage telling its own tale. Richard Sterling, flanked by a new, less formidable legal team, appeared ravaged. The once impeccable tailoring of his suits could not conceal the slight stoop in his shoulders, the deep dark circles under his eyes. His signature charisma had curdled into a brittle defensive anger that radiated from him like a toxic heat. He would stare at the press with a defiant scowl, a king unaccustomed to being questioned by commoners. Eleanor Vance, in stark contrast, was the embodiment of serene power. Accompanied by her formidable lawyer, Anya Sharma, she moved with an unhurried grace. Her attire was elegant, but severe sharp blazers, silk blouses, and muted tones, the armor of a woman who had no need for flash or artifice. Her expression was neutral, her gaze focused. She was not there for the theater of it all. She was there for a factual correction, a rebalancing of a historical record that had been deliberately falsified. In her calm, the courtroom found its center of gravity. Anya Sharma's opening statement was a masterstroke of narrative demolition. She did not speak of a messy divorce or a woman scorned. She spoke of theft, pure and simple. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, her voice clear and resonant. This is not a case about marital assets. This is a case about intellectual bedrock. We are here today because the entire edifice of a billion-dollar corporation, Sterling Innovations, was built upon a foundation. It did not own a cornerstone of scientific discovery it did not pay for, and an intellectual engine it did not credit. That foundation, that cornerstone, that engine is my client, Eleanor Vance. We will prove that her premarital, pre-corporate, and entirely independent academic work was not merely an inspiration for Sterling Innovations. It was its genesis. And we will prove that this fact was not forgotten but deliberately buried. The trial unfolded as a methodical dismantling of Richard's legacy. Anya called to the stand a parade of witnesses who one by one laid a brick in the wall of evidence against him. An elderly Nobel laureate professor from Stanford, who had been Eleanor's thesis advisor, testified with academic certainty about the groundbreaking nature of her early research into polymer membranes. Ms. Vance's work was not typical graduate research, he stated, peering at the defense counsel over his spectacles. It was a paradigm shift. Several of us at the time felt it had immense commercial potential should she choose that path. Next came David Chen, a veteran engineer who had been one of Sterling Innovation's first employees and had recently been forced into early retirement. His loyalty was not to the Sterling name but to the woman who had hired him in her garage. He recounted specific instances pulling old technical logs from memory. Whenever we hit a wall, Chen explained, his voice thick with emotion. Whenever a new product was failing in development, Richard would get frustrated. He'd say, "Go talk to the wizard. Go see what Eleanor has in her old books." We all knew what he meant. Her original research, it was our get-out-of-jail-free card every single time. The emotional climax of the trial, however, arrived when Anya Sharma called her final witness, Leo Sterling. Leo's walk to the witness stand was agonizing. He looked pale, caught in an impossible emotional no-man's land. He refused to look at his father, whose face was a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Instead, his gaze found his mother's. Eleanor gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of encouragement to harm his father, but of affirmation for telling the truth. Anya's questioning was gentle, almost maternal. She walked Leo through his childhood, asking about his memories of the company's early days. "Leo," she asked softly, "your father built an incredible public persona as the visionary of Sterling Innovations. At home, what was the story you were told?" Leo swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the witness box. "At home, it was a team," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "My dad was the front man. He was amazing with people, with making the deal. But my mom, she was the genius. He called her his secret weapon. He called her the wizard behind the curtain." "The wizard behind the curtain," Anya repeated, letting the phrase hang in the dead silent courtroom. "And did he ever say what specifically she did behind that curtain?" "She made it all possible," Leo said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He was so proud of her then. I remember him telling our investors once at a dinner party at the house. He raised a glass and said, "Gentlemen, you can all thank my wife's brain for your future beach houses." Everyone laughed, but it was true. We all knew it was true. From the defendant's table, a guttural sound of rage erupted. "He's lying! He's twisting my words! She's turned my own son against me!" Richard lunged to his feet, his face crimson, his control completely shattered. The judge's gavel cracked down like a gunshot. "Mr. Sterling, you will control yourself or I will have you removed. One more outburst like that and you'll be in contempt." Richard sank back into his chair, breathing heavily, but the damage was irreparable. The jury had seen his desperate, unhinged fury. More importantly, they had heard the family story, a narrative so powerful and authentic that it eviscerated Richard's carefully constructed public myth. When Richard himself took the stand, it was a disaster. He was arrogant, condescending, and evasive. He attempted to diminish Eleanor's foundational work as academic noodling that he had molded into a viable business. But under Anya's surgical cross-examination, his composure disintegrated. She confronted him with his own words time and time again. "Mr. Sterling," Anya said, holding up a printed email, "this is an email you sent to Ms. Vance on May 12, 2003. In it you write, and I quote, 'Ellie, the prototype for the Aqua Pure line, is failing pressure tests again. Thorn is breathing down my neck. Please work your old magic. Dig out those Stanford papers again. You're the only one who can fix this.' Do you recall sending this email?" Richard stared at the paper trapped. It was a figure of speech. A figure of speech you used repeatedly, Mr. Sterling." Anya pressed on, producing another document. Here is an internal memo to the R&D department authorizing a bonus for a project team. It states the bonus is for the successful implementation of the Vance Sterling principle. Why wasn't it just the Sterling principle? Mr. Sterling, was it because the principle itself originated with Eleanor Vance? He had no coherent answer. He blustered and deflected, but the paper trail was undeniable. He had not only built his empire on her work, he had acknowledged it privately in writing for years. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. The courtroom was packed to the rafters when they filed back in their faces, grim and resolved. The foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. The judge read the findings in a solemn tone. The jury found unequivocally in favor of the plaintiff, Eleanor Vance. They affirmed that the core intellectual property of Sterling Innovations was a direct derivative of her uncompensated academic work. The remedy, given the decades of exponential growth built upon that foundation, was not merely financial. The court ordered a compulsory transfer of equity to reflect her foundational contribution. Eleanor Vance was awarded a 51% controlling interest in Sterling Innovations. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Richard Sterling turned ashen, slumping in his chair as if his strings had been cut. It was a corporate death sentence. But Anya Sharma wasn't finished. She stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, in light of the jury's finding and given the overwhelming evidence of mismanagement and brand degradation under Mr. Sterling's leadership that has come to light during this trial, we have one final petition. To allow this company to move forward and to protect its remaining employees and assets, we believe it is essential to sever its identity from the man who has led it to ruin. We petition for the legal dissolution of the Sterling name from the corporate identity. It was the ultimate blow. The judge, after reviewing the arguments and the evidence of brand damage from the Dubai catastrophe and the stock collapse, agreed. The final gavel fell. Richard Sterling had not only lost control of his company to the wife he had discarded, he had lost his very name on its door. The aftermath was a swift and decisive corporate restructuring. Eleanor, now the majority shareholder, called an all-hands meeting at the company's demoralized headquarters. Standing before the anxious employees, she projected not vengeful triumph, but compassionate strength. She announced the immediate merger of Sterling Innovations with Vance Hydro Solutions, creating a new integrated entity. She assured them that her goal was to salvage, not liquidate. The valuable manufacturing divisions would be retooled, the skilled workforce retained. This company lost its way, she told them, her voice resonating with authority. It began to value perception over performance, marketing over making. That era is over. Today we return to our roots: innovation, quality, and solving real-world problems. We are no longer just a component supplier. We are part of a global solution. On the massive screen behind her, the old tarnished Sterling Innovations logo dissolved, replaced by a clean, powerful new brand, Vance Global. A new name, a new mission born from the ashes of the old. The final piece of Richard's empire to fall was the Atherton estate. Mortgaged to the breaking point to pay his catastrophic legal fees, it was forced into a fire sale. There was only one buyer with the resources and the motivation to close quickly, a private trust established by Eleanor. Months later, Eleanor Vance walked through the front door of the glass house. It was quiet, empty, waiting. She ran her hand along the cool limestone wall she had chosen 25 years ago. The house was not a trophy. It was a reclamation of her history, a space filled with memories both painful and precious. It was where she had raised her children, where she had sketched the very equations that had just won her an empire. She walked to the great glass wall overlooking the pool and the ancient oaks beyond. This was the exact spot where Richard had stood when he shattered her world. But the view was different now. She wasn't looking at the end of a life, but at the heart of a new one. As the CEO and founder of Vance Global, she wasn't the wizard behind the curtain anymore. She was the woman who owned the entire theater. Richard Sterling stripped of his company his fortune, and his name vanished into a self-imposed exile of shame and obscurity. a footnote in the story of the brilliant woman he had fatally underestimated. He had tried to erase her name, and in the end she had taken his. In the end, this wasn't just a story of a messy divorce. It was a testament to the fact that you can't erase brilliance. You can't silence genius. Richard Sterling thought his name was his greatest asset, but he forgot that a name is only as strong as the foundation it's built upon. Eleanor Vance, left with nothing but her own mind, proved that true value isn't in what you own, but in what you can create. She didn't just get revenge, she got redemption. She reclaimed her past, her house, her company, and her name, not by tearing him down, but by building something better. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible journey? Was her final victory justice, or was it cold revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of resilience and reclamation, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear a story of triumph, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger than fiction. Thank you for watching.
What if the perfect life you built was a lie? For Amelia Rowe, it was a dream come true, a luxurious New York penthouse, a dazzling romance with charismatic tech mogul Sterling Thorne, and a baby on the way. But on the night she needed him most, in the sterile, unforgiving glare of a delivery room, her dream shattered. When complications arose, the man who promised her forever called her and their newborn daughter a flawed investment, and walked away, leaving them to die. But he made one critical mistake. He forgot about his business partner, Owen Hayes, the quiet, watchful man in the background. This is the story of how a man left his family in their darkest hour and how his partner secretly stepped out of the shadows to become the father he never was. The view from the 40th floor penthouse was Sterling Thorne's favorite party trick. He would lead guests onto the wraparound terrace, the glittering tapestry of Manhattan sprawling beneath them, and with a sweep of his hand, declare, "This is what vision looks like." Tonight was no different. The air, crisp with the early autumn chill of New York City, was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-important chatter. Amelia Rowe stood slightly apart from the crowd, one hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her stomach. At 6 months pregnant, she was the radiant living embodiment of Sterling's success. He had curated her, just as he had curated everything else in his life. The minimalist Italian furniture, the abstract expressionist art on the walls, and the precise angular cut of his Tom Ford suits. She was an artist, a painter, with a soul full of soft colors and quiet observations, a stark contrast to Sterling's world of sharp lines and ruthless acquisitions. It was a contrast he loved to showcase. "She's my muse," he'd tell people, his arm possessively around her waist, "the heart to my head." But lately, Amelia felt less like a muse, and more like another one of his prized possessions, polished and displayed for public consumption. His affection, once a warm and enveloping flame, now felt like a spotlight demanding she perform her role perfectly. "There you are," Sterling's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, cut through her thoughts. He pressed a glass of sparkling water into her hand, his smile not quite reaching his cold blue eyes. "Our investors from Singapore are here. I want them to see the future of the Thorne legacy." He gestured pointedly at her belly. Amelia forced a smile. "Of course, Sterling." As he led her toward a cluster of men in bespoke suits, she caught the eye of the one man in the room who never seemed to be performing, Owen Hayes, Sterling's business partner. Owen was the engineering genius behind Thorne and Hayes Innovations, the quiet, steady engine that powered Sterling's flashy locomotive. Where Sterling was all charisma and sharp angles, Owen was calm and solid, with kind, observant eyes that seemed to see more than he ever let on. He gave her a small, sympathetic nod from across the room, a silent acknowledgement of the charade. Owen had been there from the beginning. He and Sterling had been college roommates building their tech empire from a dorm room and a mountain of debt. Owen had been the one to comfort her when Sterling, in a fit of rage over a delayed product launch, had smashed a prototype against the wall, missing her head by inches. "He's just passionate," Owen had said, though his eyes told a different story. He saw the cracks in the gilded cage that Amelia was only just beginning to notice. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, leaving behind a wake of half-empty glasses and lingering cigar smoke, Sterling was pacing the length of the living room, his energy manic. "Did you see the way Peterson looked at us?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "He sees it. He sees the stability, the dynasty. This baby. This son." "We don't know if it's a son, Sterling," Amelia said softly, sinking into the plush white sofa. Her feet ached. He stopped and stared at her, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "It will be a son. A Thorn heir needs to be a son. Everything has to be perfect, Amelia. Don't you understand what's at stake? The Series C funding round depends on an image of absolute stability and forward momentum. A family, a legacy. The word perfect was a weapon in Sterling's arsenal, one he wielded with chilling precision. The perfect apartment, the perfect social circle, the perfect wife, and now the perfect child. Any deviation was not just a disappointment. It was a betrayal. She felt a flutter in her womb, a tiny, insistent kick. It was a secret language only she understood, a small rebellion against the rigid expectations being placed upon this unborn life. "What if he's not perfect?" she whispered, the question escaping before she could stop it. Sterling's face hardened. The charismatic CEO vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. "There is no what if. He will be. I don't invest in flawed assets, Amelia. Not in my business, and not in my life." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as shards of glass. She looked around the vast, impeccably decorated room, a space designed to impress, not to comfort. She saw the expensive art, the breathtaking views, and the man who saw her and his unborn child as nothing more than assets on a balance sheet. For the first time, Amelia Rowe didn't feel like she was in a beautiful home. She felt like she was in a cage and the lock had just clicked shut. A few days later, Owen stopped by the penthouse, ostensibly to drop off some documents for Sterling. Sterling was out locked in meetings all day. Amelia was in her small studio, a converted sunroom overlooking the East River, dabbing at a canvas. The colours were muted, a swirling vortex of greys and blues. "That's different from your usual work," Owen said, standing in the doorway. He never entered her space without an invitation. Amelia sighed, putting down her brush. "My usual work is full of light. I don't feel very light lately." He stepped inside his presence, unassuming, yet comforting. He looked at the painting, then back at her. "He's been hard on you." It wasn't a question. She just nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "The pressure of this funding round is getting to him." Owen offered a weak defense. He didn't seem to believe himself. "He's always been this way. When we were trying to secure our first patent, he didn't sleep for a week. Everything had to be flawless." "I'm not a patent, Owen. I'm a person," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "And this baby is a person, not a prospectus." Owen's gaze was full of a deep, unspoken sorrow. He looked at her, at the canvas, at the sprawling city beyond the glass. "I know," he said softly. "Believe me, Amelia, I know." He didn't say anything more, but in that moment, a silent pact was formed. He was a witness. He saw her not as the May, or the mother of the Thorn legacy, but as Amelia. A woman, trapped a woman who was starting to become deeply, terrifyingly afraid of the perfect life she was living. And in his quiet, steady eyes, she saw the only ally she had in the world. The third trimester descended upon Amelia like a heavy shroud. The city's sweltering summer heat seemed to radiate from the pavement, making the air-conditioned chill of the penthouse feel less like a refuge and more like a mausoleum. Sterling's obsession with perfection intensified his control, tightening around every aspect of their lives. He hired a nutritionist who prescribed a diet so rigid, Amelia felt like a lab specimen. He insisted on weekly 4D ultrasounds, scrutinizing the grainy images for any hint of imperfection, his commentary sounding more like a quarterly earnings report than the excited chatter of a father-to-be. "Look at the length of the femur," he'd murmur to the doctor. "Right on the 95th percentile. Excellent. And the cranial measurements are optimal." Amelia would lie on the table, cold gel on her skin, feeling utterly disconnected from the process. The miracle of the life growing inside her had been stripped of its magic, reduced to a series of data points on Sterling's chart of expectations. Owen became her only source of quiet solace. He would often find reasons to work from the penthouse, setting up his laptop at the large marble island in the kitchen. He never pried, but his presence was a calm anchor in her turbulent world. He'd bring her a glass of iced tea without being asked, or leave a small, beautiful book of poetry on the counter for her to find. They were small gestures, but in the sterile landscape of Amelia's life, they were vibrant bursts of color. One afternoon, while Sterling was in a video conference in his home office, Amelia felt a sharp, unfamiliar pain. It radiated across her lower back, intense and frightening. She gasped, steadying herself against the kitchen counter. Owen was by her side in an instant, his face etched with concern. "Amelia, what is it?" "I don't know." She breathed another wave of pain, making her knees buckle. "It's too early." "We're going to the hospital," Owen said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. He helped her to the door, grabbing her purse on the way out. As they waited for the private elevator, the door to Sterling's office opened. He stood there, phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of irritation. "What is all the commotion? I'm on a call with Tokyo," he hissed. "Amelia's in pain. I'm taking her to Lenox Hill." Owen said, his tone clipped and urgent. Sterling's eyes flickered over Amelia, not with concern, but with cold assessment. He saw an inconvenience, a disruption to his schedule. "Is it serious? Dr. Evans said Braxton Hicks were normal. Don't be dramatic, Amelia. It's probably nothing." "It's not nothing," Owen cut in, his voice dangerously low. "She needs a doctor." Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, handle it. Text me an update, but only if it's an actual emergency. I have to close this deal." He retreated back into his office, closing the door with a decisive click that echoed in the silent hallway. The casual cruelty of it stole Amelia's breath. He hadn't touched her, hadn't asked if she was okay, hadn't looked at her with an ounce of love. He had simply outsourced the problem. In the car, Owen drove with a focused intensity, navigating midtown traffic, while his free hand hovered near the console, as if ready to grab hers. "Breathe, Amelia. Just breathe," he coached softly. At the hospital, the doctors determined it was a false alarm, a severe muscle cramp complicated by dehydration, but they wanted to keep her for observation. Owen stayed with her, sitting in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, for hours. He fielded the single perfunctory text from Sterling's status, replying with a concise, "She's stable. Doctors are monitoring." Sterling's only response was a thumbs-up emoji. "He's not coming, is he?" Amelia asked, her voice small as a nurse checked her vitals. Owen looked at his phone, then at her, his expression pained. His deal is in a critical phase. It was a pathetic excuse, and they both knew it. "The baby is a deal. Our life is a deal. I'm just a variable he can't control," she said, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. Owen moved his chair closer to the bed. He didn't offer empty platitudes or make excuses for his partner. He simply sat with her in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, a silent witness to her heartbreak. "When I first met him," Amelia whispered, staring at the ceiling, "he was so charming. He made me feel like the only person in the world. He talked about building a life, not just a company. When did that change?" "It never changed, Amelia." Owen said, his voice heavy with a truth he had clearly held back for years. "You just started to see the real terms of the contract." That night, was a turning point. The last vestiges of Amelia's denial crumbled away, leaving behind a stark and terrifying clarity. The man she loved didn't exist. He was a carefully constructed persona, a brand identity. The real Sterling Thorne was the man who closed his office door on his pregnant partner's pain. When she was discharged the next day, it was Owen who brought her home. The penthouse felt different, colder. Sterling was there, fresh from a workout, looking pleased with himself. "All better?" he asked breezily, as if she were returning from a spa day. "The Tokyo deal is closed. A $90 million valuation. We should celebrate." Amelia stared at him, at his handsome, smiling face, and felt nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. "I was scared, Sterling." "But you're fine," he countered, missing the point entirely. "Everything is fine. The asset is secure." He patted her belly with a proprietary air that made her skin crawl. From the doorway, Owen watched them, his jaw tight. He saw the way Amelia flinched from Sterling's touch. He saw the deadness in her eyes. The cracks in the foundation of their lives were no longer just visible. They were gaping chasms, and he knew with a sickening certainty that the entire structure was about to come crashing down. He had to decide what he was going to do when it did. Was he Sterling's business partner, or was he Amelia's friend? The choice, he was beginning to realize, had already been made for him the moment he'd seen Sterling turn his back on her. He just hadn't admitted it to himself yet. The storm broke on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before Amelia's due date. It started not with a dramatic rush, but with a slow, persistent ache that she initially dismissed as the usual discomforts of late pregnancy. But as the afternoon bled into evening, the aches sharpened, coiling into relentless waves of pain. This was not a false alarm. Sterling was predictably absent. He was speaking at a tech gala at the Museum of Modern Art, an event he'd called critically important for brand visibility. "My water just broke," Amelia said into the phone. Her voice strained, leaning against the cold glass of the penthouse window. There was a pause on the other end, filled with the faint sound of clinking glasses and ambient music. "Are you absolutely certain?" Sterling asked, his voice laced with annoyance. "The keynote address is in 20 minutes. This is very inconvenient timing, Amelia." "I don't think the baby is consulting your schedule, Sterling." She bit back, a surge of adrenaline cutting through the pain. "Fine." He sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. "Call Owen. He'll take you to the hospital. I'll get there as soon as I can wrap things up. Try not to make a scene." The line went dead. He hadn't asked if she was scared. He hadn't told her he loved her. He had delegated the birth of his child, like an administrative task. Numbly, Amelia called Owen. He answered on the first ring. "I'm on my way," was all he said. He was there in 15 minutes. The labor was brutal and long. Hours blurred into a haze of pain, beeping monitors, and the calm, steady presence of Owen. He was a stark contrast to the harried nurses and the rotating shifts of doctors. He held her hand through the worst of the contractions, wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, and murmured encouragement when she felt her strength failing. He was the rock she clung to in a raging sea. Sterling finally arrived close to midnight, smelling of champagne and self-congratulation. He strode into the delivery room, still in his tuxedo, looking more like a visiting dignitary than a concerned father. "Any progress?" he asked, checking his watch. "I've had to reschedule my morning meetings." Dr. Ramirez, a woman with tired but kind eyes, shot him a look of disbelief. "Your partner is in active, difficult labor, Mr. Thorne. I suggest you focus on her." The situation grew more perilous in the early hours of the morning. The baby's heart rate began to drop erratically with each contraction. Dr. Ramirez's calm demeanor became taut with urgency. "The baby is in distress," she announced. "We need to perform an emergency C-section. Now." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Amelia's exhaustion. She looked for Sterling, needing his strength, but his face was a mask of grim calculation. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the monitor, at the jagged plunging lines, as if analyzing a failing stock. Everything became a blur of motion and medical jargon. They wheeled her into a cold, bright operating room. Owen was forced to wait outside, but Sterling, as the father, was allowed in. He stood near her head, sterile and distant. "This is a complication we didn't plan for," he muttered, almost to himself. "It's an imperfection in the process." Amelia could barely speak, but she managed a weak whisper. "Just let her be okay. Please." Then a cry, thin, weak, but unmistakable. A new life had entered the world. A nurse brought the baby over wrapped in a blanket. "You have a daughter, Mr. Thorne." But the relief was short-lived. "Doctor, look at this," another nurse said, her voice low and worried. "There's some mild cyanosis around the lips, and I'm hearing a significant heart murmur." Dr. Ramirez took the baby, her face serious. "Let's get her to the NICU for observation immediately. It's likely a patent ductus arteriosus, very common in premature births, and usually manageable, but we need to be sure." Sterling stared at the tiny, fragile infant being whisked away. He didn't ask what the condition meant. He didn't move to follow. He just stood there as Amelia was being stitched up, his expression curdling from concern into something cold and reptilian. Later in the recovery room, Amelia was groggy from the anesthesia, her body aching, her heart torn with worry for the daughter she had barely glimpsed. Sterling stood by the window, his back to her. Owen was there too, having been let in by a sympathetic nurse. "They're calling her Lily," Owen said softly, trying to fill the chilling silence. "They said she's a fighter." Sterling turned around, his face devoid of all emotion. "A fighter," he repeated with a sneer. "She's defective, a heart murmur. Nai IU. This wasn't the plan. Sterling, she's your daughter." Amelia pleaded, her voice cracking. "She's a baby. She needs you." "No," he said, his voice flat and final. "What I need is a legacy. What I need is perfection. I told you, Amelia, I don't invest in flawed assets." He looked from her pale and broken in the hospital bed to the empty space where the bassinet should have been. "This entire venture has been a failure. The product is damaged and the source is compromised." Owen took a step forward. "Sterling, for God's sake, listen to yourself. That's your child. That is the woman you claim to love." Sterling laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Love? Love is a transaction, and this one has yielded a negative return. I'm liquidating my position." He walked over to the bed and looked down at Amelia, his eyes like chips of ice. "The penthouse is in my name. The accounts will be frozen by morning. My lawyers will be in touch with a severance package contingent on your silence. Do not contact me again. You and that thing are no longer my concern." He turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance. The door swung shut, leaving behind a silence so profound it was like a physical blow. Amelia stared at the empty doorway, her mind unable to process the sheer brutality of what had just happened. He had left her. He had left her cut open, bleeding, with their fragile daughter fighting for her life in a different wing of the hospital. He had left them to die emotionally, if not physically. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from her throat. It was a sound of absolute devastation. Owen rushed to her side, his face a storm of fury and grief. He took her hand, his grip firm and grounding. "He's gone, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm here. You are not alone. I promise you, you are not alone." In that sterile, cold room under the flickering fluorescent lights, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, Amelia clung to Owen's hand as if it were the only thing left in the world. The storm had broken, and it had washed everything away. Everything except the one man who had never been part of the plan, but was now the only one left standing in the rubble. The first 48 hours after Sterling's departure were a disorienting nightmare. Amelia drifted in a fog of physical pain and emotional shock, the sterile white walls of her hospital room closing in on her. The joy that should have accompanied childbirth was replaced by a gnawing, hollow terror. She was a mother to a child she couldn't hold, abandoned by the man she thought she loved, with no home to return to, and no money to her name. But she was not alone. Owen Hayes became her silent, unwavering anchor. While Amelia recovered from the surgery, Owen moved with quiet, methodical efficiency. He didn't make grand speeches or empty promises. He simply acted. His first call was not to a lawyer, but to the hospital's billing department. He put his personal American Express card on file, a black card that spoke a language of silent, absolute authority. "Cover all of Mrs. Rose and baby Lily's expenses," he told the administrator. "No bills are to be sent to her, none." His next call was to a high-end, discreet real estate agent. "I need a 2-bedroom apartment, Soho or Tribeca, fully furnished, top-of-the-line security, available for move-in tomorrow. No questions asked." He spent hours in the NICU, standing before the small incubator that held Lily. He learned her name was not yet on the birth certificate, as Sterling had been meant to sign the paperwork. Owen watched the tiny rise and fall of her chest, the flutter of her impossibly small eyelids. He spoke to the neonatologists, his questions intelligent and precise, absorbing the details of her condition. A small PDA that doctors were confident would close on its own, but required careful monitoring. He relayed every piece of information to Amelia in a calm, reassuring tone, filtering out the frightening medical jargon and focusing on the positive prognosis. When a smug-looking lawyer in a pinstripe suit arrived with Sterling's severance package, a check with several zeros, and a non-disclosure agreement, thicker than a novel, Owen met him in the hospital cafeteria. "Mr. Thorne is prepared to be generous," the lawyer, a man named Peterson, began. Owen didn't even look at the check. He slid the NDA back across the table. "Amelia Rowe will not be signing this, and you can tell your client that if one word of his abandonment of his daughter leaks to the press, the instability it would cause for Thorne and Hayes, innovations would make the $90 million valuation he's so proud of evaporate overnight." Owen leaned forward, his calm demeanor replaced by a steely resolve that made the lawyer visibly uncomfortable. "I am still his business partner. I still own 40% of this company. My reputation is tied to his. So for now, we will maintain the narrative that he is a private man dealing with a private family matter. But if he pushes this, if he tries to bully her, I will personally burn his kingdom to the ground. Is that clear?" Peterson, unnerved by the quiet fury, simply nodded and packed his briefcase. When Amelia was finally strong enough to hold her daughter, Owen was the one who wheeled her to the NICU. Watching her finally cradle the tiny 5-pound infant in her arms, a look of fierce, unconditional love illuminating her exhausted face, was a moment that seared itself into Owen's soul. In that instant, he wasn't just helping his partner's ex-girlfriend. He was protecting a family. His family. The day Amelia and Lily were discharged, there was no gleaming town car sent by Sterling Thorne. There was just Owen's comfortable, unassuming Audi. He didn't take them back to the cold, empty penthouse on the Upper East Side. Instead, he drove them downtown to a beautiful, sun-drenched apartment in a quiet Soho building. It was warm and inviting, filled with comfortable furniture, soft rugs, and a fully stocked kitchen. In the second bedroom, a nursery was waiting, complete with a crib, a changing table, and a mobile of softly colored stars. Amelia walked through the rooms, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Owen, I can't accept this." "You are not accepting it from me," he said carefully, setting the diaper bag on the floor. "Think of it as an advance. When you were with Sterling, you put your art career on hold. You were his partner supporting his vision. That has value. This is just back pay from the company." It was a fiction, a gentle lie to preserve her dignity, and she knew it. But she was too tired, too raw to argue. In that moment, the apartment wasn't charity. It was a sanctuary. It was safety. Owen didn't crowd her. He helped them get settled, then gave her space. But his support was a constant, invisible net beneath her. Groceries would appear at her door. A trusted nanny, recommended by a friend, was made available whenever Amelia needed to rest or attend one of Lily's many doctor's appointments. Owen was the one who drove them to every single one. He sat in the waiting rooms, held Lily, when Amelia's arms ached, and celebrated with a quiet, brilliant smile the day the cardiologist confirmed Lily's heart murmur had vanished, her PDA having closed completely. She was a perfectly healthy little girl. He established a new rhythm for their lives. 3 evenings a week, he would come over after work. He'd say it was to give Amelia a break, but it was more than that. He would sit on the floor, making Lily giggle with silly faces. He learned to change a diaper, to warm a bottle, to rock a crying baby, to sleep on his shoulder. Amelia would watch from the doorway of the kitchen, her heart aching with a complex mix of gratitude and sorrow. Owen was becoming a father to her daughter. Not on paper, not in the eyes of the world, but in every small, meaningful way that mattered. He was the one who heard Lily's first laugh. He was the one whose finger she wrapped her tiny hand around. He was the one who whispered, "I've got you," when she woke from a bad dream. To the outside world, the story was vague. Sterling Thorne was an intensely private man. Amelia Rowe was an artist who preferred to raise her daughter out of the spotlight. No one pushed further, mostly due to the silent but immense pressure Owen exerted through back channels. He was a master of strategy, not just in business, but now in life. He was building a fortress of privacy and peace around Amelia and Lily brick by silent brick. He was a father in the shadows, a role he hadn't chosen, but now embraced with his entire being. He had stepped out of Sterling's shadow only to willingly enter another, all for the sake of a little girl who was slowly, surely capturing his heart. 5 years is a lifetime. It's long enough for a wound to become a scar, for a fragile infant to become a whirlwind of a little girl, and for a temporary arrangement to solidify into the bedrock of a family. The Soho apartment, once a sterile refuge, was now a home pulsating with life. The walls were covered in Amelia's art, vibrant, joyful canvases that charted her return to herself, and the much lower, crayon-scrawled masterpieces of her daughter Lily. Lily Hayes was a spark of a child. She had Amelia's artistic spirit and a mischievous, intelligent glint in her eyes that was all her own. She had no memory of a cold penthouse or a man named Sterling Thorne. Her world was her mother and her daddy-o, the name she had lovingly bestowed upon Owen. To her, Owen was the son. He was the one who taught her to ride a bike in Central Park, who patiently answered her endless stream of why questions, and who had the magical ability to build entire fairy tale castles out of Legos. The name on her birth certificate was a quiet legal victory Owen had orchestrated. After 2 years of Sterling's complete and utter absence, Owen's lawyers had filed a petition for abandonment of parental rights. Sterling, by then living in a self-imposed exile in Dubai and focused on his next venture, hadn't even contested it. He'd signed the papers away as if closing a forgotten account. With Amelia's blessing, Owen had formally adopted the little girl he already considered his daughter. Lily Rowe became Lily Hayes. It was a private affair, a quiet stamp on a document that simply made official what was already true in their hearts. Owen and Amelia's relationship had evolved into a deep, comfortable partnership. The unspoken attraction that had simmered beneath the surface for years had blossomed not in a fiery, passionate explosion, but in a slow, gentle burn. It was a love built on a foundation of shared trauma, mutual respect, and the quiet moments of raising a child together. Sleepy mornings making pancakes, afternoons spent at the playground, and evenings reading bedtime stories until Lily's breathing deepened into sleep. They were a family in every sense of the word, even if they hadn't defined the precise nature of their own bond. It was a quiet, unspoken understanding. They were a unit. They were home. Amelia, no longer the timid woman overshadowed by a tyrant, had found her voice. Her artwork, raw and emotionally resonant, had caught the eye of a prominent gallery owner. Her first solo show, The Gilded Cage, was a critical success. It was a cathartic exploration of her past, with early pieces depicting suffocating, opulent interiors, giving way to later works, bursting with light color, and the joyful chaos of her life with Lily. She never mentioned Sterling in her interviews, referring only to a difficult period of transformation that led her to find her true artistic self. Meanwhile, Owen had quietly revolutionized Thorne and Hayes innovations. With Sterling's flashy, risk-addicted influence gone, Owen steered the company with his steady, brilliant hand. He focused on sustainable, meaningful technology, earning the fierce loyalty of his employees and the respect of the industry. He had long ago initiated a strategic buyout of Sterling's shares, using a series of shell corporations to mask the purchaser. Sterling, needing capital for his failing ventures in the Middle East, had sold his controlling interest without ever realizing he was selling it to the very man he'd betrayed. Owen Hayes was now the sole owner and CEO of what was now simply called Hayes Innovations. He was a titan of industry, but one who left the office at 5:30 every day to be home for dinner. Their life was a masterpiece of quiet defiance. They had taken the wreckage of Sterling's cruelty and built something beautiful and strong. They were happy. But ghosts rarely stay buried forever. The catalyst for Sterling's return was ironically his own creation, the relentless image-obsessed media. A prestigious art magazine did a feature on Amelia. It was a glowing profile celebrating her as a resilient, brilliant artist and a devoted single mother. The photo shoot took place in her Soho studio, and one photograph, a candid shot, captured Amelia laughing as a 5-year-old Lily paint smudged on her nose held up a small clumsy painting. The caption read, "Artist Amelia Rowe with her daughter Lily." Thousands of miles away in a sterile Dubai hotel suite, Sterling Thorne saw the article online. He wasn't a success anymore. His ventures had failed spectacularly, his charm having finally worn thin on investors who demanded substance over style. He was broke, his reputation in tatters. He stared at the picture of Lily. He didn't see the child he had abandoned. He saw a beautiful, healthy, photogenic little girl. He saw Amelia no longer a broken victim, but a celebrated, strong woman. He didn't feel remorse. He felt a surge of narcissistic fury. This was his legacy. This was the perfect family he had envisioned, and they were thriving without him. In his warped mind, they owed their success to the crucible of his rejection. They were his story to reclaim. He saw the name Lily. He saw the resemblance to Amelia, and he imagined to himself. He did a quick search, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He found Hayes Innovations, noted the name change, and saw Owen's soaring success. The pieces clicked into place in his mind, forming a narrative of betrayal and theft. Owen had stolen his company. Owen had stolen his woman. And Owen had stolen his child. He booked a one-way ticket to New York. He wasn't coming back for love or for family. He was coming back for reclamation. He was coming to take back the assets he believed were rightfully his. The years of quiet growth were over. A storm was gathering, and it was heading straight for the happy, peaceful home on a quiet street in Soho. The first contact was an innocuous-looking email in Amelia's inbox. The sender was S. Thorne, and the subject line was simply, "Our daughter." Amelia's blood ran cold. For 5 years, he had been a phantom, a bad memory she had processed through therapy and art. Now, here he was, 2 words on a screen threatening to shatter the world she had so carefully rebuilt. The email was classic, sterling, arrogant, presumptuous, and devoid of any genuine emotion. "Amelia, I have been following your success, and I have seen pictures of Lily. She is the spitting image of a thorn. It is time for her to know her real father. I have returned to New York, and I expect to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience. We have much to discuss regarding my role in her life." There was no apology, No acknowledgement of his cruelty, of the abandonment of the years of silence. It was a demand, a summons from a king to a subject he believed still owed him fealty. Amelia's hands trembled. The old fear, the feeling of being small and powerless, crept back in. She immediately called Owen, her voice tight with panic. "He's back, Owen. Sterling's back." Owen's calm voice was an immediate balm. "Okay, Amelia. Breathe. He can't do anything. He has no rights. He's a ghost. Just ignore him." But Sterling was not a man who could be ignored. When his emails went unanswered, he escalated. A courier delivered a large, extravagantly wrapped gift to the apartment, a ridiculously expensive dollhouse, a hollow gesture meant to buy a child's affection. Lily was confused. "Who's Sterling?" she asked, looking at the gift tag. "Just a man who used to know Mommy," Amelia said, her voice strained as she quickly put the box in a closet out of sight. The next day, the true nightmare began. As Owen was walking Lily to her preschool a few blocks from their apartment, a man stepped out from a black town car. It was Sterling. He looked different. The years had not been kind. There was a desperation in his eyes, a thin veneer of his old charm stretched taut over a core of failure. But the arrogance was still there. "Owen," he said, his smile a predatory slash. "It's been a long time." He then crouched down, trying to meet Lily's eye. "And you must be Lily. I'm Sterling. I'm your real father." Lily, shy and unnerved by this stranger, instinctively hid behind Owen's legs, clutching his hand tightly. Owen rose to his full height, placing himself squarely between Sterling and the child. His voice was quiet, but it vibrated with a dangerous intensity Amelia had never heard before. "You will not speak to my daughter again. Get back in your car and leave." "Your daughter?" Sterling scoffed, standing up. "That's a good one. I saw the adoption papers. A neat little legal trick. But she has my blood. You think a piece of paper erases that I'm here to reclaim what's mine? My legacy, my family." "You don't have a family," Owen said, his voice dropping even lower. "You forfeited that right in a hospital room 5 years ago. This little girl is not an asset you can reclaim to fix your pathetic life." The confrontation was brief but brutal. Passers-by began to stare. Sterling, ever conscious of his image, shot one last venomous glare at Owen and retreated to his car. But the damage was done. Lily was shaken, full of questions Owen and Amelia weren't ready to answer. That evening, they sat her down and tried to explain in the simplest terms that Sterling was her birth father, but that Owen was her real dad, the one who loved her, raised her, and was always there for her. It was a conversation that left all three of them drained and sad. Sterling's next move was to go public. He gave a carefully crafted interview to a notorious gossip blogger, painting himself as a heartbroken father who had been pushed away by a vindictive ex and a treacherous business partner. He claimed he had been battling personal demons, but was now healthy and desperate to connect with the daughter who had been kept from him. He spun a tale of corporate backstabbing, accusing Owen of stealing his company while he was at his lowest point. The story was a masterpiece of narcissistic fiction designed to win public sympathy and exert maximum pressure. Their private sanctuary was shattered. Paparazzi began lurking outside their building. Friends called, confused and concerned. The quiet life they had built was suddenly under a microscope. Amelia felt the walls closing in. The trauma she thought she had buried was fresh again. She had nightmares of the cold delivery room, of Sterling's cruel words. "Maybe we should just talk to him," she said to Owen one night, her voice full of despair. "Maybe if we give him something, he'll go away." "No," Owen said, his face set like stone. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "We don't negotiate with terrorists, Amelia. And that's what he is. He's terrorizing us. He's not doing this for Lily. He's doing this for himself. This is not a custody battle. It's a hostile takeover of our lives. And I will not let him win." His resolve was absolute, but Amelia could see the toll it was taking on him. The legal battles were mounting. Sterling had hired a shark of a lawyer and was suing for visitation rights, contesting the adoption and filing a frivolous lawsuit against Owen for control of the company. He was using the legal system as a weapon of harassment, trying to bleed them dry emotionally and financially. The ghost of the past was no longer just haunting them. He was laying siege to their present and threatening to burn down their future. The quiet years were over, replaced by the clang of battle. This was the final ugly war for their family's survival, and Sterling Thorne had made it clear he would stop at nothing to win. The war of attrition waged on for weeks, a grueling siege of legal motions, depositions, and slanderous articles planted by Sterling's PR machine. He was fighting a public battle, attempting to sway the court of public opinion before ever setting foot in a real courtroom. He portrayed himself as the prodigal father, reformed and repentant, while painting Owen as a calculating usurper, and Amelia as an unstable artist who had poisoned his daughter against him. The stress was immense. Lily started having nightmares. Amelia found it difficult to paint the joy in her art, replaced by a creeping dread. But Owen remained her rock, absorbing the worst of the attacks. He shielded her from the daily legal minutiae, his resolve never wavering. The turning point came during the deposition for Sterling's lawsuit against Owen over the company. It was held in a sterile conference room in a downtown law office. Amelia was there as her testimony was required. Sterling sat across the table looking confident and smug, flanked by his aggressive legal team. Sterling's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was questioning Owen about the buyout of Sterling's shares. Isn't it true, Mr. Hayes, that you used a series of anonymous shell corporations to purchase Mr. Thorne's shares, deliberately hiding your identity from him during a time you knew he was financially vulnerable? I bought his shares, yes, Owen answered calmly. You deceived him, Peterson pressed. You took advantage of your partner. Owen looked not at the lawyer, but directly at Sterling. Deception. Let's talk about deception. He placed a small audio recorder on the polished mahogany table. This is a recording from the night Lily was born. It's from the hospital's security system. Not audio from the room, of course, but from the hallway camera just outside. It picked up the conversation quite clearly when Sterling walked out. Sterling's face went pale. Peterson shot to his feet. This is inadmissible, an invasion of privacy. Is it? Owen's lawyer countered smoothly. My client was present for the conversation, making him a party to it. And it speaks directly to Mr. Thorne's character and his claims of being a loving father who was pushed away. I think any judge would find it highly relevant. Owen pressed play. The conference room was silent, save for the tinny sound from the recorder's small speaker. Sterling's voice, cold and clear, filled the room. Defective. A heart murmur. This wasn't the plan. I don't invest in flawed assets. This entire venture has been a failure. The product is damaged. I'm liquidating my position. You and that thing are no longer my concern. Amelia closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Hearing the words again was like a physical blow, but this time they were not just a weapon against her. They were Sterling's self-inflicted wound. The air in the room grew thick and suffocating. Sterling's smug facade had completely crumbled, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. His lawyers were whispering furiously to him. Owen wasn't finished. He slid a folder across the table. And these are the sworn affidavits from 3 former employees of your Dubai venture. They detail your misappropriation of investor funds for personal use, the real reason your company collapsed. You didn't leave New York because of personal demons. You fled because you are a fraud. Sterling stared at the folder, then at Owen, his eyes blazing with hatred. He had been so focused on his public narrative that he had forgotten Owen was a brilliant strategist who documented everything. He had completely underestimated the quiet man he had always dismissed as his subordinate. This is over, Sterling, Owen said, his voice level. You will drop the lawsuits, all of them. You will sign a legally binding agreement to never contact Amelia or Lily again. You will walk away and disappear. If you do not, this recording and this file go to every major news outlet in the country, and the SEC, your public image will be the least of your worries. It was a complete and total checkmate. Sterling Thorne, the man of charisma and vision, was exposed for what he was: a hollow man, a coward, and a cheat. Defeated, he gave a curt nod to his lawyer and without another word stood up and walked out of the room, a ghost finally exorcised. That evening, the Soho apartment was quiet. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for weeks had finally lifted. Amelia stood on their small terrace, looking out at the city lights, no longer seeing them as the bars of a gilded cage, but as a sea of possibilities. Owen came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. "He's gone for good." Amelia leaned back into him, her body relaxing into his warmth and strength. "You saved us, Owen, all those years ago and again now." "We saved each other," he said, turning her to face him. He looked into her eyes, his own full of a love that had been patient for so long. "Amelia Rowe, I have been in love with you since the day Sterling first brought you to the office, and you told me my code was as elegant as a Kandinsky painting. I didn't have the right to say it then, and I spent the last 5 years trying to earn the right to say it now." Tears filled Amelia's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "You never had to earn it," she whispered. "It's always been yours." He lowered his head and kissed her a kiss that wasn't born of frantic passion, but of deep, abiding love, of shared history, and of a future they had fought for and won together. From the doorway, a small voice piped up. "Are you guys getting married?" They broke apart, laughing to see Lily standing there in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Owen scooped her up into his arms. "What do you think, Lilybug? Should I marry your mum?" Lily giggled and threw her arms around both their necks, hugging them in a tight embrace. "Yeah," she squealed. "Then we can be a family forever." Owen and Amelia looked at each other over her head, their smiles bright and full of promise. They already were a family. They had been a family all along, forged, not by blood or by contract, but in the fires of betrayal, and rebuilt with the quiet, sturdy materials of loyalty, courage, and a love that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The dawn was breaking, and for the first time in a long time, it promised a beautiful day. And so the story of Amelia Owen and Lily comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that the families we choose are often stronger than the ones we are born into. Sterling Thorne believed legacy was about perfection, power, and bloodlines. But Owen Hayes proved that a true legacy is built on presence, on sacrifice, and on showing up when the world walks away. He didn't just save a mother and her child. He built a home where there was only wreckage and showed that the quietest love often speaks the loudest. What did you think of Owen's ultimate checkmate? Was Sterling's downfall deserved? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, love, and quiet heroism moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that touch the heart. Thank you for listening.